Great. So throughout the session, I will be discussing two things. The first is some key concepts in social justice and feminism that will really help anyone who is even a beginner or an advanced debater to just create a case on social justice. The second thing that I want to discuss is just a practice between you and me, where I give a social justice motion. We will be doing three motions of different kinds in social justice and feminism so that you and I can help build a case and we can get some idea on how a good or a winnable case on social justice and feminism look like. If you have any questions throughout the session, you can raise your hand, feel free to interrupt me, write it in the chat box. You can do anything so that I can stop midway to ensure that your doubts get cleared. I will also be pausing between the three sections for 5 minutes each to ensure that any and all doubts are getting cleared. I created a very short document on key social justice concepts. Let me just share it. These are just like potentials for creating it. The way in which I created this doc is easy. So this is where I think AI can be useful. I don't suggest using AI for making cases, but I do suggest AI for creating, let's say, case files in the sense glossaries. Not case files specifically. You can create glossaries with the help of AI. What are some of the AI that I suggest? I think don't use ChatGPT because ChatGPT is going to give you some incorrect definition. I tried it myself, and I think the definition of equality in ChatGPT is very, let's say, it's not that deep enough, or neither it gives you a bit of context. But if I type the same, let's say, definition in Perplexity Pro, or let's say Zotero or other kind of AI tools, the definition is a lot more based and a lot more nuanced, and you can contextualize it even. So I can just write it for research purposes. Perplexity, if you have Airtel subscription, I think you can get like Perplexity Pro. If you all are students, you can take use of your student ID and you can get like a lot of suggestible things, and you can get access to a lot of AI tools as well. Great. I can start with the first concept on equality. Obviously, we know that equality stands for treating everyone the same, but usually in debates, when you justify what equality is, the usual definition doesn't work because either of the sides can just say what equality means for what people. Example, for situating a definition, whether it's feminism, whether it's equality, whether it's equity, whether it's intersectionality, it's very important to ask four questions. The first question is, what will this um, definition do to certain people? To certain people. Example, just stakeholderize everything. Let's say if equality is meant for men, what does it mean for women to have the same equality? Because the definition of equality changes with what kind of people interact with that sense of equality. The second question that you can ask yourself is, what is the short term goal for equality and long term outcome of equality? Obviously, it's very difficult to visualize very abstract terms like equality, justice, human dignity, but all of it is very sensual in nature, which means you will have to tell the panel, if you, let's say, grant somebody an abstract concept like human dignity or equality or intersectionality or wealth distribution for that matter, how will that person use these things or quantify these things in their daily life? An example from a debate or a case would just be, um, uh, let's say if Dalit people or marginalized people from a rural area in India get equality, they will be able to send their kids to school and they will not be facing things like discrimination or overt kind of abuses that other people give it to them. This really helps you to quantify that abstract concept and tell the judge persuasively that this actually makes sense. The second thing that the third question that you can ask is, um, can you weigh it in principle, or can you put a moral weight to it? The third question is very rhetorical because obviously, if you grant somebody things like equality, dignity, human rights, you will assume that it has moral weight. Because all of this is morally justified. Nobody would want to not have equality. nobody would want to, let's say, have things like equity. Everyone would want to have a good quality of life, so everything by default will have some moral weight to it. I'm talking about the abstract concepts here. So but for the judges to prioritize your sense of abstractness is by giving it some weight. So you will have to give it some principal weight as well. This is principally more important than their value because it's going to grant you more long term benefits. So by weighing or asking some questions that put a weight to your abstract concept really helps the judge understand why this will be important for some people. The fourth question that you can ask yourself after looking at these definitions is it going to be of any value in future? If you look at the fourth question and the second question, there are some overlaps. But what is the key difference? The fourth question is only about looking at the sustainability of your outcome. Let's say if you say things like equality is important right now, or let's say safety or human dignity for Palestinian people is important right now, you will also have to suggest that this is going to be crucial for any and all wars that are coming ahead. You can't just restrict it to certain concepts. Like, sure, I mean, right now a lot of things like safety of livelihood is crucial for Palestinian people, or safety of life for that matter, human rights, etc. But ensure that you're able to create a very transferable way of saying that this is going to be crucial in the next 10 years as well, 12 years as well, because these are the people who are going to be affected, not just Palestinian people but anybody, let's say Ukrainian Muslims in China. So different types of stakeholders need the same kind of abstract concept to ensure that the quality of life goes up. These are the four questions. I've written it in the chat box. So this really helps you to situate your definition. So here, if I say things like equality means treating everyone on the same, this definition will be incomplete until and unless you justify these things to the judges by placing some stakeholders more crucially than the others, which means equality for men will be like, hey, I think I'm like benefiting over concepts that have privileged me in the past. But if I say it for a woman, obviously women haven't seen the sense of equality that men have seen over a past, let's say, 100 years or a decade. So it's important for you to situate these things within a stakeholder, which means you would want to give each person identical resources or opportunities, or you would want to translate some meaning to other stakeholders who have never received these kind of benefits. Let's talk about equity, because there's a common fight about what to use in social justice motions. Should we say equality or should we just say equity? Again, it depends on the motion framing. If the motion framing has equality, obviously you will then discuss equality of resources, opportunities. If the motion just says equity or doesn't even have equality as a concept, you can then assume it to be equity, because equity is a very safe bet to run with. Because inequality, you will have to justify, oh, do men also have the same resources, because they anyway have it. But in equity, I think you get some leverage that maybe some stakeholders are more crucial in getting opportunities than others because the others have been getting it so far. Great. Let's come to intersectionality. Intersectionality has been a really misunderstood concept in debating circuit because it just means that maybe different types of social identities come together, but it has some different concept or like context as well, which means there is a pyramid of intersectionality. Okay, I can't. It's a view document. Never mind. It's a pyramid of intersectionality. I will just type it. Imagine intersectionality to be a pyramid. Pyramid might be a wrong diagram, but let me just help you visualize it. Imagine there's a white woman, then there is a white queer woman, then there is a Muslim queer woman, then there is a black queer Muslim woman, then there is a these are the four identities. I will write it again: a white woman, a white queer woman, a Muslim queer woman, a black Muslim queer woman. Can you all tell me which person is going to be affected by the discrimination? You can rank it as well. You can type it in the chat box, or you can tell me verbally. What do you think should be the chronology of discrimination? Yeah. Absolutely. So you can see how different types of intersectionalities come together to show that there are so many other kind of social injustices which might affect some people more than the others. Sure, like a white woman is privileged because they have a certain color, but it doesn't mean that uh, let's say they are going to not face other discrimination as well. But on a relative scale, a black Muslim queer woman is going to face more discrimination than a white queer woman because of added racial inequality and an added religious inequality plus an added LGBTQI inequality that surfaces the world right now. So try to look at intersectionality from a relational context. So always like remember relationality. Obviously, if I am going to be poor, I will have to look at others who are poor. Example, let's say if other person doesn't have infrastructure to live in, they don't have school or university to go to, they don't have like financially healthy parents, or they don't have medically healthy parents, I think I am not going to be like more poorer than them because they lack the infrastructure conventionally. So always look at intersectionality with a relational point of view, because that will help you to look at social justice movement from a bird eye perspective. You might have heard it a lot more times, but if you add the analysis that I've just said right now, I think it's going to give you an edge on other teams who just say that intersectionality matters. Oftentimes, the judges are looking for visualization in social justice and feminism motions for the concepts to be grounded. Like, if I just say intersectionality matters, I think the judges will be like, yes, it's a good concept that has been quoted and it's very intuitive. But if you say things like, black women may face both racial and gender bias at work, her experience is not just racial plus gender bias separately, but a unique intersection. So, obviously, like if you say the concept of relationality and explain it with visuals, I think that's going to make you a more persuasive case line. The second comment that I want to add quickly is how do we see other cases and what is different in social justice and feminism motions. To win a social justice and a feminism motion, I think visualization is the key. But it doesn't mean that your speeches have to become rhetorical, like a political speech or like a contemporary speech that people go on and about. Uh, Let me give a classic comparison. In an economics case, you can just explain very chronologically that this is how the market falls. Step A, step B, step C, step D. But in a feminism motion or a social justice motion, you will have to ensure that with every case analysis, you will have to attach some, let's say, instance or an inference that will help the judge understand what type of relationality are you talking about. Let's say if you just discuss things on surface level just because you know the definition of it, it becomes very difficult for the judge to quantify the outcomes, because qualitatively you both can be better in terms of teams, but like to be able to quantify the benefit, one has to make it visually clear that this group is facing so much of a discrimination than others, so it's visually more easy to quantify some harms over the other. The next thing I want to talk about is systemic oppression. It's the most buzzy word of the circuit of using words like oppression or systemic oppression for that matter. But usually, like, there are four pillars in systemic oppression. It's a very holistic term, people use it like it. So, I think obviously, if you talk about oppression, you will have to look at what kind of oppression are we talking about. So, there are four things. If you discuss four things in length, I think your cases also have a lot of breadth and depth. The first is practices in general. What kind of practices have oppression? Religious practices have oppression. um, Marriage as an it's an institution, but there are so even household practices, domestic practices, all of these, let's say, day to day practices have oppression. One practice is more oppressive than the other practice. Example, let's say if I have to think about temples, obviously a Dalit person wouldn't be allowed to enter into a temple and, let's say, have give like a prasad to a god. But let's say a Hindu person will be allowed to enter into a temple and give prasad to the god. So the food practices itself, or the idea of giving prasad, or who gets the let's say legitimacy to have some uh, let's say blessings of the god, is determined by some practices uh, dictated by the society. So practices itself generate some sort of oppression. The second is institutions, very popular. You can look at marriage as an institution, you can look at home as an institution, you can look at law as an institution. So there are so many systems. So here I think you can use the pestle analysis. Pestle analysis is obviously politics as an institution is oppressive. You can look at economic institutions which are very oppressive. Obviously, there are different layers of what these oppressions look like. Economic practices look like, let's say, third world economies are, let's say, are giving higher interest rates to World Bank or other like white economic institutions, and they can't afford, but they have to give nonetheless because they owe some sort of loan from these World Bank or Western institutions. S stands for social institutions, marriage, let's say caste, all of these. T stands for technological, obviously big tech and how big tech is being divisive in third world economies, second world economies, and first world economies. Environmental, obviously the third world economies are supposed to, let's say, bear the brunt of climate change when you know that the first world economies generate more carbon dioxide or more, let's say, carbon footprints, but they don't take the accountability for it. I think there are so many movements which are happening currently to showcase that the third world economy shouldn't bear the brunt disproportionately. Environmental institutions are oppressive. Then there are legal institutions which are obviously oppressive. So if you analyze these kind of, you can pick and choose. Let's say if the motion is about law and social justice, take a legal institution which is being really oppressive and then try to situate it within the motion as well. I will take some examples, but this kind of, let's say, breakthrough or breakdown will help you to, let's say, make a case which is easier to tap than just look for a broader overview. The next is culture. Obviously, there's a difference between culture and practices. Practices come within culture, but culture can't. Uh, let's say culture can't be just one practice. There could be multiple practices within one culture. So obviously, you can look at different cultures. You can look at different traditions. You can look at different communities, and try to look at what are these communities. Oftentimes people say that we want to do community work, but what are these communities? Are these like the Harijan communities? Are these the Hindu communities? Are these the Muslim communities? Are these the gender communities? So try to just differentiate one community for the other and try to understand these communities. So most of the social justice movements by default become more clear, because community incentives, you might know what the community wants, because so many debates are just like, hey, this is what the community wants, but do you know what these communities want? Do you realize the back history of what these communities have been going through? So try to research on these communities. The Okay, this was A, B, C. Okay, D. D should just be D should be looking at the oppressor. This is a very controversial take, but I think you cannot understand the oppressed without understanding who is oppressing them. So obviously, look at an oppressor's mindset. Let's say if you have to look at the Modi government, you will have to understand what they are doing in order to oppress somebody who's a minority or a Muslim in India right now. So obviously, look at the mindset of an oppressor. This really helps you to contextualize or create a relational framing. Obviously, it would be a bit biased to only look at the oppressed, because obviously, like, you will lack a lot of context when you once you don't understand what the oppressor is trying to do in the first place. So that just helps you to build an existing knowledge and helps you to get some context on what this looks like. Great, let's look at the next concept, which is redistribution. But before that, I just want to pause so that we can take 1 minute breather, or you can ask me any question. Or is the pace fine, or do you want me to slow down? I can accommodate any and everything. Sorry, this is undergrads at Ashoka. Great, I will go again. I will go with the redistribution part. Uh, Redistribution is a solution to most of the things which are happening. Because in social justice or in feminism motions, the solution usually is, hey, we want to ensure that the community gets visibility, the community needs to get popularity, the community leader can get some, let's say, weight so that they're able to represent in parliaments or political decisions. Basically, get some social capital or wealth. So, but the best way in order to visualize any kind of solution for a social justice movement or a feminism would be looking at redistribution first. Obviously, it's not the best solution, and it's obviously not the only solution. But you can look at redistribution. What does allocation of wealth look like? Can you visualize redistribution in a country which is very poor? Can you visualize, let's say, income distribution in a country which is very rich? So what kind of things would you visualize so that the social justice movement or feminism as a motion gets some solution? beyond, let's say, your obvious outcomes, such as giving tax brackets, or giving, let's say, kind of benefit to lower income families. So always try to bring economics inside social justice or feminism, because it really helps you to quantify that this is what you will do for the community to actually get something. uh, Again, this is very context based. You don't have to include economic policies or economic solutions to every social justice motion, because they're not asking for it. It only happens in 10% of the motions where they're trying to look for any actionable outcome. An actionable outcome can look like, okay, maybe progressive taxation really helps this community, or affirmative action in the sense that maybe 15% of the seats could be reserved for women, can really help the community to have some visibility in political stature. So maybe think of these ideas when you think of solutions, and compare the solution to the other team, because the other team might just say, hey, visibility, but you have to understand what this visibility looks like. Do you just want to have a campaign? If it's a campaign, you can get visibility, but is it long term? Not really. So try to look at the specifics of the solution that the other team is trying to give you or give the judge. Next is agency and participation. Usually, this is the underlying principle in every social justice or feminism motion. So, obviously, debaters can say things like, this community should have the capacity to make their own choices, or some kind of change. This community should ensure that they can participate in every local body election. But these kind of things become very abstract. So how to use these terms so that the social justice movement and feminism motions become very accessible to you. So think of agency as something which can be done. Don't include agency as a term which can't really be accessed by a community. Because I think the first is, let me take an example. Let's say if you want to give agency to women, you can, because it's very easy for, let's say, but again, it's very difficult for certain women to access agency than some women. Example, a white woman can access the agency more quickly than a black queer Muslim woman, because the barriers to access is very prominent in a case of a black Muslim queer woman, because obviously she has a lot of other uh, discrimination to sort out too. So the first bullet would be to think of agency as something that could be given out easily and faster. So think of communities which can reach that agency. Why am I saying this, and why can't you prove the other way around? If, let's say, the other team is saying that agency can't be given to these communities because of XYZ reasons, and if they end up proving it that it's difficult to get agency, your point might be difficult to state then. So what do we do in this case? If the other side is saying agency is difficult to access, what you can do is at least try to find out the most, let's say, visible people of that community, and even if you can get them agency in the first place, I think it's net benefit for the community, because it's very difficult on either sides to prove that any all communities will get agency at all times. So you will have to create a time period, create an access point for agency to ever come across. How will these people participate? So always think of the most plausible things that can happen, as opposed to granting, let's say, agency to everyone, because then if you grant it to everyone, you will have to prove how is this happening, how are they getting access to schools, what is happening. So you will have to complicate the idea of agency as you go far and beyond. So these are some of the key social concepts that I had in mind that you can obviously look through. Some of the most common mainstream social justice concepts are obviously social movements. Here, I think, for understanding social movements, you will have to always think of it as a collective. There are so many social movements in the world right now. There is environmental movement, which is a fight for ensuring that all the climate change is going to be reversible, which means you can't just see carbon footprints being increased. So you essentially want to save the environment. So that's an environmental movement. Always, when you want to study social movements, try to always look at some of the leaders which are indigenous and mainstream leaders. So you can divide those leaders. Mainstream leaders could just be Greta Thunberg, indigenous leaders could be Veena Das. So this really helps you to just stay up to date with the social movement. The second is obviously feminist movement. You can look at contemporary and old feminism. So there are four waves of feminism. First wave of feminism, second wave of feminism, third wave of feminism, and fourth wave of feminism. The first wave of feminism is just like, hey, I think we should get voting rights. Second wave of feminism was just let's say we should get some equal opportunities. The third wave of feminism was an extension to Equal Rights Amendment Act, Equal Rights, where they introduced an amendment called Equal Rights Amendment Act, and where I think different types like liberal feminists and like conservative feminists were fighting with each other. Should we stay at work? Should we go to office? All of these things. Fourth wave of feminism is currently happening right now, where we are discussing things like Me Too, sexual harassment, agency, participation, who should get the rights, etc. So yes, feminism movements, feminist movement, LGBTQI movement, which is a separate movement and it shouldn't be considered within feminist movement. LGBTQ movement, which is ensuring that you get equal rights and opportunities for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer communities. Obviously, you can increase it. You can include multiple sexual orientations in it. Then you have indigenous community movements. This is a very homogenous term. Uh, yes, I think this should be good. There are other types of movements as well. This is anti-abortionist movement. If I had to bring in another idea, I think art movements can also be included in social justice movements, because you can just say art plus social justice can also be a motion. So yes, always look at these movements, try to study, try to find out one indigenous leader out of it and one mainstream leader. You can look at some of the videos available on Vox or YouTube. I can send a reference pretty soon post the session. This is the end of the first part of the session. I want to pause here for a minute to figure out if there are any questions that you have towards these key social justice concepts that I've explained. And if something is not clear and if you want I can repeat something, I am definitely up for it. Okay, assuming no questions, I think we can move on to the second part of the session, which is just doing a case prep together. So I will give you one motion, and then you will have to come up with some case lines that you have. Then I can give you a second motion, and third motion could just be a assignment that you can do later whenever you're free. And yes, great. I will take one motion. Okay, this is a good motion. In countries where protests are legal, this House believes that social justice movements should always adhere to local law enforcement and regulations. This is a random motion that I've picked up from debate data. You can definitely go on debate data and look for motions like that. I will give you all 2 to 3 minutes to come. We can do side proposition. We can take 2 to 3 minutes to come up with some arguments. You can write it, you can say it, whatever you want. Great. Does anyone have any thoughts? You can say some key arguments that you have. Anyone who wants to give it a try?
I'll give it a try, but
Yes, yes,
not sure
she.
that will be a very good argument.
That is fine. I
So,
think we can hear you.
yeah, the idea is that if a country, if it is a country where protests are legal, in that case, it is pretty likely that they also via non-violence. So, it is logical or understandable to say that the law enforcement will crack down on violent protests or any kind of violence a lot. That is going to be a huge deterrent. So, in a place where protests are very commonplace, a movement that sticks to the law and doesn't have any kind of bad PR because of that is going to stand out.
Yes, makes sense. Does anyone else wants to give it a try? Yes, Jatin.
I just wanted to add on to this. So, if we were to not adhere to local law enforcement and regulation, now the main focus of the movement, because we've already talking about systemic oppression, and because if I'm to assume this is a country in status quo, it's going to be to a certain degree more male dominated, even in the legal field. So now the focus simply shifts from what the movement actually wants to do to the movement fighting against the policymakers to explain themselves, and now resources go into this as well, because the policymakers are in a better or an easier position to label the movement as anti-national or anti-law because of just even the smallest of mistakes. So now resources go into me trying to justify my actions as the social justice movement as opposed to what I actually want to propagate.
Yes, this is true. Does anyone else wants to add on to or want to give something else? Okay, so both of these ideas are correct. What are some of the initial ideas that you can think of? One is, I think it's very important to first define what these protests, which are legal, look like, because obviously the conventional idea of a protest would be like, hey, I think we disagree with the government on these rules and regulations, and we want to go on a protest. There are different types of protests. There are labor union protests, there are social justice protests, there are protests against the government, there are protests, let's say, for a certain specific community. So obviously you would have to first like make the judge visualize what these illegal protests look like. The second thing that needs to be justified is what are these local law enforcement and regulations, because on the side of proposition you are trying to, let's say that social justice movement should always, let's say, respect the laws which are coming on board, and you're also protesting, so basically bringing two anti-ethical ideas together. So what is the safest argument that you can run here on side prop? The first could just be safety. Oftentimes when you look at protests, they become very violent, they become unnecessary, and they become very chaotic. And oftentimes a protest is a very high intensity activity. You will have to sit on naras, you will have to go on dharnas, you will have to fight the government, maybe the government gets angry. So it's very important for a protest to be sustainable, so that's a outcome that you will have to run. So how to make a protest sustainable and long term, because there's so many high intensity protests which do not last a long time because the governments don't like them, or they have a lot of barriers which needs to be crossed, and people, most of the activists have fatigue and they leave the protest because they don't feel like fighting anymore. So it's very important for a protest to be long term. So how do adhering to law enforcement makes the protest safe? I think it gives the ability for the protesters to at least make some compromises, and these are the kind of, let's say, trade-offs which need to be taken on proposition. You will have to agree to some laws to ensure that your protest is long term. The benefit is most of the activists do not feel this lack of something, and they're able to sustain themselves within a protest. So the protest doesn't die down. The number of people who are joining might increase because now you have some kind of negotiatory spot that you can sit on. The second claim that I could think of is how I think you can regulate the protest. This is more like an outcome within the first argument. It's very important for a movement to never become a mob. So it's very crucial for most of the protests to become very powerful and increase in the number of size. So if you adhere to some laws, I think it's very easy for a lot of people to opt in and not opt out, because you can just follow some rules. It really helps you to have some breathing space as well. It gives the protesters the power to justify their wants. So if you say that, oh, okay, we are listening to some laws, at least we will be able to, let's say, come to a consensus with the oppressor, like, hey, these are the things or these are the demands we really want to be fulfilled. So it gives you a good table, or a good burden of justification that you can justify to the government. So these are the two outcomes that I could think of. Let's go to a second motion quickly. This one is very popular. Yes, Srijoni.
I have one question. When
Yes.
that these countries probably have a male-dominated field, uh, wait one second. The countries are going to be who are not going to be very supportive, and we are going to waste time explaining ourselves. Can a logical rebuttal to that be that just because the field is male-dominated doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be against protests?
Fair enough, but again, you can do a little bit of legwork and chronological work to be able to prove that. Because regardless of, let's say, the government being gendered or not, there are going to be, let's say, so many hurdles that one has to cross. So, regardless of it being a male dominated government, maybe there are so many hurdles that one has to cross. So, assume that obviously, like, the assumption is that it's going to be male dominated, but the best way to prove this is, are you able to get some solutions even when the government is male dominated or not? Does it help?
Got it. Thank you.
No worries. Next motion. Very okay. Yeah, this one. This one is a very, very famous motion. I think every school's tournament or every university at this point does this motion. This motion is called This House believes that social justice movements should encourage the formation of cults of personalities around their leaders. We will try to do op this time. You can take 2 to 3 minutes to get some answer, get some arguments.
I need a clarification.
Yes.
What are cults of personalities?
So cults of personalities, without giving a lot, I think I'll say Mahatma Gandhi is a cult of personality. Yeah, Ambedkar is a cult of personality for the Dalit Bahujan movement. Greta Thunberg is a cult of personality for environmental movement. Does this help? Okay. I'll just be back in 2 minutes. Yes, I think we can start. Does anyone have any thoughts on this motion? You can say anything that you like, even like a remote idea of it would help. Yes, Srijani.
It is a bad idea because if people go ahead and become the flag bearer of any particular movement, these particular people, if they fall short in some way, the way J.K. Rowling passed some inappropriate comments about the LGBTQ community, or it is a particular person getting targeted the way Greta was targeted, just because of this one particular person, the entire movement is going to suffer.
Fair enough. Does anyone else wants to add? Great. Let's start from basics. So, the basics would just be to look at the objectives of a social justice movement. Objective of a social justice movement is to ensure that they are true to their objectives. So, let's say if I'm fighting for something like equal opportunities, I wouldn't want to compromise on this because the compromise would be like, hey, I wouldn't get equality of opportunity for women, or some kind of, let's say, social class within that movement altogether. So, no compromisation on the objective is the first goal. The second goal will be to ensure that the social justice movement is retaining their followers. The third would just be to ensure that the social justice movement is able to achieve a goal. But when you look at opposition, the first two goals are very crucial because the second goal is visibility. That is where government is going to bring their most strong argument, which is, hey, I think if you have cults of personalities, easier for the movement to get popular. What will opposition say here? The opposition's first rebuttal is going to target visibility. It's not crucial for a social justice movement to get visibility on the expense of some of the objectives getting compromised. What will these objectives be? Let's say if Ambedkar is very crucial for Dalit Bhujan movement, people will only, let's say, listen to the things that Ambedkar will have to say. Sure, I mean, a social justice movement is getting visibility, but at what cost? Maybe there are some disagreements within the social justice movement itself. They will never get the level playing field as a Ambedkar follower because they don't have that mass appeal. So it's very crucial for all the people in that social justice movement to get that same recognition. The second is why these. The second question that you need to ask yourself in opposition, which is more direct, is why these formation of cults of personalities is bad. Not even inherently, like it's very bad. The first is it really crowds out information. People will only know one, two people, like Greta Thunberg in environment movement, but people will not know other kind of movements which are happening in other countries, like an Indian environmental movement, which has more important problems than, let's say, a Western environmental movement. The second would just be it only, let's say, uh, it does not highlight the disagreements of the movement. The third would just be maybe if there is any misappropriation at the forefront, and if the social justice movement is getting compromised, nobody will pay attention to it because they only listen to that one person. This last thing that you can put as a nail in the coffin is why one person is bad for a social justice movement and why you need thousand other people to represent it properly. Because what is representation? Where everyone's opinions is getting kind of central viewpoint. In if some people are getting no representation and others are getting representation over the cost of others, it shows that the social justice movement is not following its objectives, is maybe marginalizing other people, is maybe creating a sub oppressor within that oppressing community. So ensure that all people get equal representation. So it's just like the objectives of the social justice movements get better fulfilled on site op than gov. I hope this gets cleared. I will add one more motion that everyone can do as a byproduct of it. Yes, Prachi. Definitely, but one is you will have to find an argument within this because this is a characterization. A cult of personality is obviously like how does it become a cult of personality? What is that cult around them? What is that mass following? Where does it come from? Who gets the opportunity to elect it? Is it just mass following, or some people like it, or maybe it's kind of media visibility? All of this is within context. The argument that you can find out within it is a rebuttal for visibility. Why some, let's say, formation of cults of personalities is bad because of xyz reason, so that becomes your primary argument based on the context of what you've settled right now. Does it help? Okay, no worries. One motion I've given just as a preliminary byproduct thought that you can do post the session. It's this house believes that Western social justice groups, again, it's very difficult to justify what these Western social justice groups is. But this motion is interesting and popular because it asks you to think of what this would look like. So this is a very false binary kind of motion. Usually comes a lot, but it's important to be prepped for these motions as well. Have a moral obligation to adhere to a global agenda as opposed to local one. So the entire motion is very vague. You don't know what a global agenda is. You don't know what a local one is. You don't know what a moral obligation look like. So you will have to do a lot of contextualization. So the only way to win a social justice movement is to give so much visualization, is to is to set up a very good context, and that context can take up to 2 to 3 minutes in a 7 minute speech because the social justice movement becomes very vague at the end of the day. And both the teams, if the round is terrible, we'll end up discussing the context and say it's an argument. So it's very important for you to spend at least, like, even if it's taking 4 minutes, spend some time just building on the context. Then arguments become very, very intuitive, and then you can just like draw impacts out of it. So usually the time period of characterization could elaborate to 3 to 4 minutes worst case, 3 minutes best case, 2 minutes if you think that the context is very intuitive according to the motion. And then you can spend like a considerable amount of time on arguments. Then you can spend at least 2 minutes on impacts for grounding what your arguments look like. This is the end of this session. I have covered three aspects. Just to do a little bit of recap, first is social justice concepts, how can you use them and how can you ground them. The second thing is a bit of practice. Third is let's do it right now, it's Q&A. Do you have any questions for me in this session? Thank you so much for coming in the session. I think it's been a delight for me to come here. I'm so sorry for making you all wait. I think that was not my intention, but thank you so much. Yes, Shijoni.
Okay, I have one last question. When
Yes.
you talk about how we should not simply state something, for example, the Dalit community is not doing really well, and anything that we say um, put more of visualization into it. It is not something that comes very intuitively to me in the way. So, is there some kind of a thumb rule that I can use for it?
Can you just say it one more time because I think the voice was a bit unclear. I got the gist of the question, but again, like one more time could really help.
Yeah, sure. So, what I mean is, कि you talk about how we should go ahead and put more visualization to whatever we are seeing. So, who mostly would go ahead and say the economic collapse for A, B, C, D reasons. That's not how we should go for social justice movements and feminism. So, that is not something that comes very intuitively to me. So, do you have any kind of thumb rule that I can use so I can put it in practice?
Okay, I will try my level best to answer this question, but let me know if things get a bit unclear. One is obviously there's, I think, some a kind of difference in how people see oppression in debates also, because obviously people who are a certain gender will see oppression in a very, very different context, and they will be like, hey, I think the way we have defined, I think it should be very, very clear to the judges. But oftentimes I think one has to spend a lot of time just contextualizing everything, even if you think it's intuitive. Like if you think discrimination is intuitive, yes it is, but oftentimes you will have to give a lot of visualization for that discrimination to have some grounding or have some impact as well in debates, unfortunately. The second thing is, what are some of the examples that you can use? And I think one is you can derive examples out of the social justice movement itself, like what is happening with these movements, why some of the communities are getting harmed, and then you can quantify it. Like this is the magnitude of harm they are feeling, this is the intensity of the harm they are feeling, this is what we can do to fix that intensity of the harm. So all of these things will really help you to, let's say, classify the discrimination and classify the way in which that oppression is happening. So that really, really helps you to contextualize everything, give an example, find it from like the movements itself. Nothing like, you don't even have to bring personal examples, because personal examples can be very, very context driven. You don't want to give only one boxed example, you can think of larger examples from the movements itself. Does it help? Does it just come very close to what you were trying to ask? Okay, lovely. Great. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, seeing no questions, thank you so much for coming. If you have any questions, you can stay back. I can help you answer. If you don't, you can. Yes, the session is officially over. See you at SM.